Okay, everybody, it is 7:16. We are obviously being recorded tonight. So if you want to speak, you've all got your little hands to put up. I'm sure Wendy or me will see you when you ask a question. Apologies for absence, Wendy.
We've had apologies from Councillor Jeffries and Councillor Kerrin.
Sound like you're in the night of the proms. Is everybody happy and read the minutes of the last meeting on 13th of July?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I haven't been given any items of urgent business, just that Sean, are we still putting the charrettes off till 7:30, or are we going straight in now?
Rebecca's here,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Rebecca, you want to start? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Yeah, just let me do the.
Yeah.
Hang on, Rebecca. Sorry. Any declarations of interest at all? No. Take that as a no. Right, Rebecca. Item 5, Thurrock charrettes process briefing for members and service leaders. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, 9.
Thank you. I'm just going to apologise in advance. My children were supposed to be in bed asleep. They're not quite. So if you do hear noises of screaming children, I'm just apologising ahead of time, and also shouting at the half whilst trying to get them to bed. This is briefly, I sent through the paper. It's just a very brief introduction into what the process is for the charrettes, which is part of developing the local plan. So the focus is really on understanding and identifying how the local plan affects all the different service areas and setting out that framework. So we're undertaking a sort of charrette process, which is a sort of way in terms of bringing together workshops of people to really look at what the issues are, what the opportunities are, and how the local plan can move forward. The first stage is really the bit that we're in now, which is looking on the internal communication. So briefing yourselves, briefing the wider council membership and the lead members on what we're actually doing. So there's quite a lot of logistics involved in terms of the process itself, which is going to focus on briefing everybody internally, then undertaking a borough-wide workshop, which will be online, but will also be accessible to members of the public who don't have access to digital consultation. So we are going to be having information put in libraries. I appreciate at the moment under lockdown, there's complications with that, but we will have phone numbers. We will be able to post out packs of information. We will have people who will be able to talk people through the process as well. And we'll do everything we can to support that. We are working with the engagement team as well as the communications team and the local plan team within the council to make sure that we make this as accessible as possible. The borough-wide process is really about asking people the questions following on from your voice, your place, your voice, and the issues and options consultation, using the findings that come from that to kind of further develop our thinking, further develop the questions and get people feedback from that, which will then feed into a series of workshops which will take place with landowners, which will go through who all submitted their sites through the issues and options, and that will then take place understanding what land is available, what potential is in those different areas, using the feedback that's come through member engagement, the internal council engagement, and external engagement with the broader Thurrock communities, feeding in through to the landowners. There is then a further stage which combines all of that feedback into one and takes it out into further public engagement, where we will do further stage 2 and 3 processes of engagement with the broad community alongside education, schools, engagement processes. There is obviously the complication at the moment that whilst we would always encourage doing digital engagement, and the council have an excellent platform which they use to do that, and we would always encourage that, clearly you would ideally be doing that combined with physical engagement as well. So you'd be doing workshop events, public exhibitions. For the time being, we are working on the basis that certainly, obviously, between now and Christmas, that's unlikely to be possible. We would still like to potentially hold some physical events in the new year. But all of these things have to be caveated with what is possible time in terms of social distancing. So everything is being made available online and through different methods and means of communication engagement. The fundamental point of all of this, I appreciate that was a 30-second run through a relatively lengthy document, is to first off ensure that everybody within the council who needs to understand what the process is understands that. We will make sure that everybody who is potentially frontline staff, so whether it's switchboard or whether it's people at one-stop shop reception centres, has information so that they know if somebody comes in or calls and asks them what's going on, they know the basic responses and they know how to direct people appropriately, so the information is consistent and there is a good chain of communication. There's a piece of work that we're doing with the communications team in terms of obviously they will control press engagement because this obviously links in with other things that are happening with the council. And as I say, the work that we're doing with the existing community engagement team in the council, who are best placed to understand some of their own communities. And we particularly want to ensure that we're utilising existing community newsletters and outreach, albeit all within GDPR rules, etc. But this is a Thurrock run process, so information will be going out in lots of different ways. Our focus is really to try and ensure as broad engagement as possible to get as many people engaged in this process. There is the official BIMBY, which is a Princess Foundation term, which is Beauty in My Backyard, the official BIMBY toolkit and surveys. Some of them are very complex, so we're going to break those down a bit because we're quite conscious that it can be off-putting for people if it's going to take them half an hour, 45 minutes to fill out a survey. We're also very, very conscious of consultation fatigue with having done issues and options and your place, your voice. So we're really keen to focus on this as moving that on to the next stage and explain to people what that charrette process is. At the moment, we're putting together sort of logos and branding and infographics as much as we can to try and simplify the process. And this is obviously part of that. There's various discussions which will be going on with the board and membership group and obviously the service leads and the officers within the council as well, to ensure that everybody understands what the process is and also what their role is within the process before this goes out to the broader public. So over the course of the next weeks and months, we'll be developing the external communications piece, but first off getting this internal piece done so that everybody understands what the process is. That's a very, very quick canter through that document, and I am happy to chat it through in more detail. Anybody have any questions?
Sorry, Rebecca, you said, thank you for that. You said that you're going to do a briefing with, does that mean all members, all 49 of us?
That is the intention, yes. Yeah. I think the challenge with that is dates, getting dates and diaries. But I think that with the process, Sean, I'm not sure, we haven't quite got confirmed a date with that at this stage, have we?
No, we've got a series of dates, but it's working out the logistics as to when the vast majority of members are available. That will guide us in terms of what date we choose.
With this COVID in, the 4 weeks we're going to have to go into, that's going to put you back, isn't it, really?
I mean, it doesn't put us back in terms of a lot of what we're doing at the moment is the preparation and getting materials ready in our FAQs and trying to pull together the various departments in the council who need to be involved, and that's logistically going to take quite a few weeks anyway. I think obviously if this lockdown carries on, then clearly that will delay the process. The anticipation was that it would be a virtual briefing with the members anyway, I think. I mean, I think in an ideal world with 49 members, you'd want it to be face to face, but I suspect that it may end up being virtual. I think that's still to be determined depending on what date it is.
Yeah, I mean, we're really talking about January, aren't we now? I would think.
I think we were ideally hoping that it would be pre-Christmas, but it might well end up being in January.
Yeah. Is there anybody else got any questions for Rebecca? Luke?
Thanks, Rebecca. Obviously, I mean, my concern is, like yours, is the engagement and how to get community engagement and how to engage, not just be the same places, but engage with everything. Because I think there's a core of members in every single ward that go to everything. And it's getting, and their views may not represent the wider Thurrock. So I would hope that we could. I mean, in terms of social media engagement, which is going to be key, I hope that you could probably tap into. There's some very widely huge membership local forums, discussion forums in Thurrock, and I used them extensively when I was on a different site for my engagement. So rather than just going through Thurrock social media, you know, make sure you're posting on these big sites. I mean, Stamford House got about 10,000 members or something like that see it. There's one in nearly every town. Just make sure you're. I mean, make sure you're hitting. You get. Yeah. I mean, I'm not teaching how to suck eggs properly. I do apologise. But you know, there are a lot of established little community groups online that you could really increase the reach of all your posts, especially if you made them engagement posts with polls on them, you know, stuff like that where people have to click something and make them quite. I mean, I think that's probably a good way to get around the lack of physical consultation that we're going to have, to be honest.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that is a really important point. So the forums, it's really useful for us to know about them. So we're putting together a digital marketing strategy. So we will be looking at Facebook at various different ads that works on different algorithms. So we'll be to target, say, you know, different age groups, different demographics. So and those can be tweeted. The advantage of doing digital marketing is when normally, you know, you send out a flyer or a leaflet for an exhibition, and that's it. It's gone out. People turn up, they turn up. If they don't, they don't. The digital engagement, you can keep looking at the stats that are coming through, so you can see if you've missed, you know, if nobody between under the age of 40 has engaged with this, and you can tweak your adverts and etc. to get those people in. But the forums definitely, I think, you know, there's not by no means one thing. It's going to have to go through lots of different ways, and I think the clickbait thing is really important. So adverts that people are going to click on, whether that is a poll or whether it's just something that looks interesting, you click and carry through. At the moment, the engagement platform that the council uses you have to be registered and you have to log in to use it. And our suggestion is that for this, that you take that away, that you don't have to register and log in, because it adds another 2 or 3 steps before people can get to the survey or get to it. And if you're sitting there, you just want to click on it, click, do the survey, not then have to log in, wait for that to be confirmed and verified, because I think you'll just lose people. So, absolutely. Basically, I agree with you. But I think the forums, that's something that we haven't yet looked at. So I think that's just really useful that I've made note of that to make sure that we do check what they all are.
I mean, just to clarify, and I know you probably understand already, but I mean the online discussion forums.
Yeah. Absolutely. Forums. I know. Well, no, it's a kind of like Nextdoor, you know, the online Nextdoor forum and those sorts of things. Lots of, absolutely.
Rebecca, just to come in on the back of Luke there, you've got lots of organisations like the U3A, because what you've got to remember, the one member of the U3A you may speak to, they may get to a lot of other people. So I think there's about 800 people on that site, and you may be able to get to a lot more. So U3A is good to look at. I don't belong to that, but if you wanted to ring me anytime, I can put you in touch with someone for that, you know, to help.
That'd be really helpful.
If there's any help. Yeah, Alex?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mine was more, I'd say, of a comment, Rebecca, and you kind of touched on it there, and it's regarding the online consultation process. Obviously, if it's going to primarily be done online, the material that we're going to be asking people to fill out and comment on, obviously we want to make it as accessible as possible and not sort of long-winded. You know, we don't want to be asking people to you know, fill out 600 questions with 2,000 characters and all this sort of thing, but, you know, because then people are going to lose interest. So it's more just a comment that I think it is important that we make things accessible and not necessarily brief, but not sort of onerous, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I think we've got work to do yet on that survey. So we were talking about today actually with the local plan team and how best to do that, and particularly given there has been previous consultation. But yeah, it has to be. We've done it before, where you've had lots of people start a survey and a lot of people drop out partway through because it's really lengthy. And to an extent, for that particular project, it was actually we needed people who were going to stay the course and give the really in-depth information. And that's fine, but I think for this, we need people to just be as engaged. So it's still getting the really valuable information, but as you say, in a way that doesn't make people think, oh God, I just haven't got the time and the energy to do it because it's I've had a whole day with kids or whatever it might be. So yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure. Thank you, Alex. I'm sure that you've got a lot of friends of groups. I'm sure there's Natalie Smith in the council. She would know most of them. She'd know the chairs of most of them. So
yeah, we've been talking to Natalie.
Yeah, because then they talk to other people, and then they can. I mean, you're going to have a job to get, unless you're going to send by post, which I imagine you are. Some of them, because there are a lot of people out there who haven't got devices, but still interested in what's going on in their area.
Yeah, so we are working out the best way to do sort of post packs as well, because if libraries aren't open, I mean it's all such an evolving situation at the moment, and we wanted to work on the basis that libraries would at least be open and people could go and pick up packs or things there, but we might have to work on the basis that might not be possible. So it's just really what is the best way of getting that information out to people, and it probably is going to be through those community groups who can then distribute further information, etc. But we are very conscious that not the digital stuff is great, but not everybody has that access to it, so we do need to make sure that we're not excluding people.
Yeah, brilliant. Anybody else got anything for Rebecca? Do you know when you're going to get this back to us, Rebecca? Do you know the time scale we're working to?
What, in terms of the
feedback we're going to get back from this at a later stage?
I mean, it depends on the time frames of the whole thing, really. So we haven't. Once we launch, the idea is once we launch a survey, then you'll be able to start. We'd have that running for at least 4 to 6 weeks before you then present feedback. So it's in progress, but it's not going to be in the next imminent.
Anytime soon.
Anytime when we can, yeah. But we will keep it obviously updated once we've got clearer time frames.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely. And Sean, did you want to add anything to that? Got your mic off, Sean.
Yeah. Sorry. Obviously,
right.
COVID's going to be a big determinant as to how quickly we can mobilise and start taking the work forward. I think sort of like once we're up and running, we will have a process that will roll out very quickly and efficiently. And I think because we have been briefing landowners and developers over the last 6 months, they're aware of what's going to come their way, and also sort of information that they will need to provide us to provide to Rebecca and colleagues, getting that all assembled. And I think there is a real willingness also from those participants to get involved and forget about their own site and look more about how they can contribute to the places in Thurrock and making them much more attractive proposition to live in. So I think, because we have been acting as ambassadors, I think even though we might be slipping a little bit coming up to Christmas because of lockdown, I think we can quite easily make up time when we come out the other side of Christmas, New Year period.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Yeah, I think we've got to get smarter, haven't we, as well? I think most people in there, wherever they live, want to see a better quality of whatever is going to come through. So I think it's we need more woods and greenery. Luke?
Again, just on social media as well, I think we could probably get quite organised definitely in terms of members, and maybe in terms of staff of simultaneous sharing of the post. So I mean, if you can get buy-in from, how many members are there who work for Thurrock Council? If 200 people or 500 people share something on the request of, can you please share this, and 50 members share it, then 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people will see that post immediately. So perhaps that's one way that we might want to look at, creating a tidal wave on local Facebook as a way of getting around the fact we can't have these sort of groups. It's that sort of organisation using social media that can get you a real big amount of views on a post.
I think we've got to remember that Thurrock Gazette, obviously it's online, but it doesn't get out to people as it used to, through the door. It doesn't come that way anymore. So it might be there, as you said, at the libraries, but the library's not being open. It's not going to be picked up for quite a while. But I think it's something we've got to look at, as Luke said. We've got to go other avenues, really. But I'm sure there's many councillors out there that will help you, Rebecca. I'm sure you can grab all their numbers, and as Luke said, if one shares it with one, or one shares it with four, it's a knock-on effect, isn't it? Luke, did you want to come back in? No? Okay. Alex, did you want to anything? Are you all right?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm sure we'll have more questions for you at a later date.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks. Everyone, bye.
And your children were no trouble.
Because I was on mute. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for your time. Okay, we're on item 6, page 17. White paper planning reforms. Did you want to start this off, Sean? Or did Lee want to come in first?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just say a brief few words just in terms of introduction, then hand over to Sean. So in August, obviously the government published a white paper which sets out its proposals for the reform of the planning system. And this paper that's before you in the agenda explores the proposals and provides some commentary on some of the potential implications arising, but also some of the positives that we see from that, given some of the work that we're already doing. And actually, the last item is a good example of that. So with that, I'll hand over to Sean to go through the detail.
Thank you, Lee. Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of like as Lee said, the consultation started on the 6th of August. And unfortunately, because of the timing of the task force meetings, we weren't able to come back to you before we had to submit the consultation response, which was last Thursday. So what we will do is we will send you a copy of that response this week. And I think, it's fair to say that when the government published the document back in August, all the meetings that we attended with civil servants were based on the premise that really this isn't a white paper, it's actually a green paper. And there's so many concepts in the document that require further work. It was almost as if, well, maybe we shouldn't have published it at this time. And I think because of that, there's been quite a lot of pushback on what's in the white paper, because many things have not been properly explained. But when you do look through it, there's some really interesting and useful approaches that are being trialled. And I think as a local authority, we've taken the view that we should be getting in discussion with government and looking at piloting some of the aspects of the white paper where we think it dovetails neatly with the work that we've been doing for 2 years, but also where they're introducing new concepts such as the digitisation of planning, something that will probably take a little bit longer to introduce than government thinks. And it'd be helpful to be in at the beginning so we can learn. Also, if we're a pilot authority, potentially get government support to roll out some of those concepts. Luke, did you want to say something, or do you want me to continue? But in terms of the white paper itself, the government have broken it down into 3 distinct areas, 3 pillars. First pillar is plan making, and there the government is proposing significant changes to the way we produce local plans. And indeed, being a planner for the last 30 years, they are quite fundamental in terms of how planning and development management will operate in the future. I mean, obviously, I think everybody would agree with the government's proposals that local plans take too long to produce. And whether you're the author, the reader, or the user, the length of those documents and the number of policies is all very difficult and negatively written. So they're not positively couched in terms of supporting development. But I think the biggest thing with them is that have they ever really engaged with the local communities in their development? I think what government is now keen to do is make sure that people are more involved right from the very beginning in helping shape the development of the local plans, right through from looking at development of visioning for the neighbourhoods through to the development of master planning, and then ultimately the coding of potentially new development locations so that they reflect what local communities want. But there is a negative to that in that in give more priority to local plans. The government is now trying to get to a situation whereby if you've got an allocation in a local plan, you've already got an outline planning permission. When you look at the way they've broken areas down into sort of like 3 categories of growth, you would have an allocation which would give you permitted development. You would not have to go to development control or development management committee to get outline permission. If you are in a renewal area, which would, for argument's sake, would be town centres or existing built-up areas, the idea is to extend permitted development rights. So again, you wouldn't necessarily have to go and get planning permission the way that you previously did. And then finally, in protected areas, the situation would be that yes, you would still have to submit a planning application by and large. The local communities could object to proposals, but if you wrap it all together, there does seem to be less opportunity for communities to engage with the planning process. And I think you've, over the last 6 months, 8 weeks, planning press have picked up, and that has been one of the biggest issues. So what is the future for development management? What is the future for development management committees going forward? So I think that's one of the issues that we have pushed back on, saying that we require further information on how the process is going to be rolled out. Are the processes for engagement through the local plan process an adequate substitute in terms of enabling local communities to have a say on development proposals that will impact on their area? So that's one of the big issues that we responded to. And the other thing is in terms of the plans themselves. They are very much now about making plans about places rather than looking at sites. So there is a big emphasis on high quality design, master planning and infrastructure planning. Now, all those things we are doing in Thurrock anyway, but most local authorities do them to a degree or other. But this idea that we make plans shorter, more adaptable and flexible, but produce them in 30 months is quite a heroic challenge to local authorities, particularly when there's a lack of resources. So there's again a question mark there as to whether the system, albeit promoting a concept we can support, is actually in place to enable local authorities to deliver those plans. And the other thing is the second pillar is about making beautiful places. And again, this is something everybody can subscribe to. I mean, for years, many local authority areas have seen development which has been really poor, has gone against what the local communities want, and has not stood the test of time in terms of how it's been designed, constructed. And in many instances, those buildings are now time expired, even if they're only just 30 years old, and are not adaptable or sustainable. So the only real alternative is actually pull them down and start again. But when you have building after building, potentially in declining town centres, all impacting upon each other, then it just creates a perspective of ever decreasing decline, which makes it more difficult for local authorities to manage. So again, the government is now promoting the idea of building beautiful and better places, which is something that we should support. It's talking about a national approach from the top, looking at national design guides and design codes, but then encouraging local communities working with the planners in the plan preparation process of pulling together their own design strategies, design codes, which reflect their wishes and the neighbourhood within which they live, but also enabling them through those processes to influence the overall outcome of the planning process when it comes to making those local plans a reality. So that is again something that we have been working on with the Prince's Foundation over the last 2 to 3 years. It's getting that early engagement started. It's working with the local communities and pulling together those visions and concepts for their place, and then looking at what sort of design principles are right for those locations. So again, that's something that we roll out over the other 8 areas. And that again demonstrates how far we are ahead of most local authorities when it comes to delivering the government's key messages. Now, all of this will require a significant resource nationally as well as locally. And the government's expectation is that planners who've worked in development management will now move over and suddenly become urban designers and design coders. And so there's an issue there of people transitioning over, and whether at this moment in time, local authorities will have sufficient resources to do it in the way that government is hoping is question. So again, we've pushed back to government and asked when and how are additional resources going to be made available. Is that 30-month period for producing local plan deliverable? Should we be looking at something a little bit longer to enable local authorities to transition across to a new system and to train up existing staff? So there's quite a few issues there that need to be unpacked and addressed. But it is perhaps the right way to start going about creating better living conditions for local communities. And then the third element, which again is something that we've discussed many a time in task forces, about infrastructure, and making sure the infrastructure is delivered before development comes forward and it's the right infrastructure in the right place. And the government again is looking at simplifying how local authorities gather funding for infrastructure schemes through abolition of Section 106s and the Community Infrastructure Levy, and replacing it by a new infrastructure levy, which would be based on an approach developed nationally, whereby development value created locally, there would be a threshold above which local authorities could then take money from the development and actually use it to fund infrastructure at the local level. Of course, the concern there is that if this is all national, how will it reflect differences between different individual areas? I mean, Thurrock is not Chelmsford, Chelmsford is not Oxford, Cambridge, Bucks. So if you've got this national threshold, will it deliver in some of the sort of like the more difficult parts of the UK sufficient funding to make sure that the infrastructure required to deliver homes, affordable housing, schools and health facilities is actually available? So again, I think further work needs to be done, which is why we've said that we again would like to be involved in any processes going forward, so we could apply the thinking to Thurrock and see how it would work for us, and then if necessary suggest some changes that actually might help at a national level. So those are the sort of like the three big areas where the government is looking to bring forward change. And as I said at the beginning, there is so much more that needs to be done in terms of providing local authorities and developers with information on how these processes might act. So I think that although we've already made the submissions, there will be further white papers and government documents coming out over the next 6 to 9 months, trying to provide more flesh on the processes that they're promoting, particularly once they've read the representations that are coming in, which have all been a mixture of, we do need change, but we don't know if the processes that are being proposed are the right ones. Can we look and consider other ones? So it's been pretty positive, albeit there is also that concern behind everybody's mind. How do we deliver the homes that are required, and how do we calculate what number of homes are needed? The government still hasn't really come up with an approach in detail which allows local authorities and other partners to forecast and deliver the right amount of housing in individual areas. It's again using an algorithm which is given figures which then have to be addressed through a netting off of planning considerations, whether it's green belt, flood risk, landfill. All those things will enable local authorities to reduce the bill, as it were, when it comes to housing numbers. But again, there's no guidance out there as to how this will work in practice. So there's lots of things that have been promoted which will require us working with government to develop a series of approaches that will work in practice. But government has also made it clear that whilst they would like to see the system in place and each local authority have a new style plan by the end of the Parliament, we should continue to focus on our existing local plans and not get too distracted. So that means that we need to have plans significantly advanced or in place by December 2023. Otherwise, there is a risk that government could intervene unless there are exceptional circumstances which would dictate otherwise.
Thanks, Sean. I know you want to come in, Luke. I've probably got about 20 questions there. Infrastructure, we seem to have been talking about that since time began, infrastructure, because it's still not working. It's good to see what may come of this with the local, smaller developers who want to get into the area. I think that's a good thing. I mean, we've got a Persimmon site in Blackshots, which we lost 106 money. We lost 2 million. That was the local development corporation, and the 106 money from that was 2 million, and we've not got any of it in Blackshots. So I think there used to be education, health, highways, and there used to be a bit on the end. I don't know if Lee remembers that, but there used to be a bit on the end for libraries for local communities, sat on the end of that. So, and there doesn't seem to be any of that now. So that would be good to have that change. I think we've, as you said, Sean, perhaps it's come to us too soon. We need to see a bit more, I think. I'll let Luke come in, so I've got loads of questions. Luke?
Yeah, I mean, I've never even considered wanting to be on planning committee. I find the whole system absolutely just farcical. You know, it's just ridiculous way to agree on, you know, projects of small, medium, and large size, and it is, you know, the whole committee, and then challenging it with it's a nonsense. It's just a charade, and the idea that it's quasi-judicial as well, it's laughable, to put it mildly. So I mean, it is a system that needs massive reform. In terms of these specific proposals, though, it's been said that these proposals are much more palatable to built up areas like Thurrock than they are in the south, than they are to the Shires and northern regions, and the concern is that it's not going to deal with the fundamental issue of centralisation in the UK. But from Thurrock's perspective, what would you say is the biggest, from what you've seen? And again, this white paper is definitely, this isn't what's the legislation that's going to go through, because there's a lot of opposition. But from what you've seen, what's the biggest advantage of this potential reform for Thurrock, and what's the major downside that you see for Thurrock?
I don't think, personally speaking, that there are any downsides, because we are a growth authority, and I think we have come to terms with what the housing levels we have to accommodate. We're also a greenbelt authority, and the only way that we can actually accommodate that level of development is to look at development in the greenbelt. But because we are looking at it from a very proactive stance, it enables us to plan, working with local communities, the end outcome. So it is new, rather than actually try and retrofit solutions into older areas. We've got an opportunity to actually make it work in a way that the local communities want. Whereas if you live in the urban areas, then you obviously have to deal with all the issues that have been their legacy issues for sort of like 50, 60, 100 years. But what it also does is, in doing that, in working with the grain in terms of the market and developing new settlements or urban extensions, to actually use the value generated to look at how we actually improve the urban area, how we deal with long-standing infrastructure issues, how we actually improve access to the countryside. So we start dealing with some of those health and well-being issues that have been long documented. And I think that over a period of time, if we start taking out declining areas and actually recreating them, refocusing them, making them more adaptable and attractive in terms of a living environment, then everybody benefits. But you can only do that if you grasp the nettle of accepting growth.
Sean, why are we not maybe not part of this? Well, it could be, but why are we not? A lot of the mobile homes and things that are being done now for older generation, 55, well, I wouldn't say 55's old, but over 55s, why are we not doing that in Thurrock? Or why are we not thinking about it in Thurrock? Every other borough seems to take it on board, but we don't seem to do that.
We have had discussions with mobile home providers, and they are keen to come to Thurrock. And if you think of those big housing numbers that we've got to address, I think you will need different types of housing in different locations of different tenures to reach those numbers. So there will be a need to deliver that type of housing, as there will be for other types of housing, modular housing. Well, then looking at niche housing for the different community groups, the elderly, and others. So I think our offer will be based on all those different typologies.
I mean, we've got to look at it in Tilbury from a point of view where we've had a high tide lately in Tilbury, and it's come over the wall. So with all the building work that's been going on in Tilbury, the water is now looking for somewhere to get out. to the Thames, because we've blocked off most of its, you know, I know the flood defence is looking at hiring the wall, but I think we've got to look at it from another, if we're looking at infrastructure, we've got to look at how much we are doing in Tilbury, because we've got to, with building, we've got to look at all the fields that farmers used to do their ditching with. I know in Lincolnshire they're doing, they're making builders do something with the ditches for the farmers, because that's where a lot of excess water runs and then runs into the little streams and rivers and runs off. So I think we've got a big river sitting down there, so we've got to make sure that it's got somewhere to get out, you know. So I think that's another issue. Just to pick up on page 22, Sean, we mentioned more powers to address unauthorised development. Does that mean what we've got, obviously, with the development in South Ockenden? Does that mean that more powers to us?
Yes, it does. But it's more generally enforcement. The government wants local communities to feel that the local authorities got the resources to actually deploy the powers that they've already got in an effective and efficient way.
Yeah, I think there needs to be more. Probably Lee might want to come in on that. I think there's got to be a bit more. We are getting some more people in enforcement now, aren't we, Lee?
Thank you, Chair. So the enforcement team isn't growing in response to this current paper. But what, as Sean just touched on, the paper reiterates the ambition for local authorities to have stronger planning enforcement powers, and that is more likely will come about through increased resourcing to those teams as opposed to any new powers or legislation. But again, going back to the beginning of what Sean was saying, there's a lot to unpack through this consultation. So that's why we're seeking to take this as far as we can to make the very best of it that we possibly can for the people of Thurrock.
Sean, are we also looking at you know, perhaps there is time for another village somewhere, you know, in Thurrock? You know, years ago when Alsett was built and Baldwin was built and Horndon, they were all small villages. Perhaps there is, you know, I know we've got some development going up on the 127 or 128, sorry, small developments like that, but there's nothing there. You talk about infrastructure, there's nothing there to sustain that. I know Baldwin's just, oh, sorry. I noticed Baldwin has just got a little shop going now. But that's what you've got to have. You've got to have that infrastructure there to sustain the housing that's coming, or the little housing developments that are coming. So are we in the process of looking at other villages, you know?
Yeah, I mean, basically, we've got 8 locations for the rollout of design charrette. 5 of those are basically around the major urban areas, whether it's Ockenden, Chadwell, St Mary, East Tilbury, Corringham, Stanford-le-Hope, where there are opportunities potentially for urban extensions. But then we've got the 3 villages which will also have design charrettes. I think there we're looking at the capacity of those villages to sustain further development, and if so, what are the limitations on that? I think obviously you mentioned Baldwin there. It is at this moment in time, if you look at our call for sites map, there are quite a few developments along the A128. The question as to what should be the extent of Baldwin and how those sites can help develop and achieve a different place. You know, we've always talked before about the lack of shopping facilities and other facilities because of the smallness of the village. Is there a scope to actually accommodate some more within the village? And if so, how would they be viable? So there's quite a bit of work to be done. But the idea with the charrettes is to give the local community and the landowners that opportunity to have discussions about what would Baldwin look like if we were to look at different scales of development. Because the last thing you want to do is lose the character of the village itself. And once it's lost, forever.
No, definitely. And I think you've got to get community on board, and you've got to sustain. You know, if you've got a lot of older people and there's no children, then the school fails. So you have to have that. Also, it seems to have got that normality where they've got that little shop, and I think when the shop closed in Bourbon, the community seemed to have got together and opened one in the community hub now. So it's good to see them doing something. And I don't know, perhaps there's a place for a little coffee shop where the old shop used to be. You know, there's all those little things to bring community together, that there's something there where they can meet up. So it's all those small things that we should be looking at. Luke, did you want to come in, or you just turned it off? Alex?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I just wanted to say,
Sorry, Alex.
like, what's on your shopping list, guys, for what you would like to see in this paper that isn't there? So, what's missing? What do you, to make your job, you know, putting together a local plan easier and putting it into action? What would you like to have seen from the government that you haven't seen from the government?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, I think more. Yes.
Apart from abolishing the planning committee, of course.
I think, you know, there are things that have been there for a long time. More clarity over Greenbelt and what it means, because obviously, many local authorities, particularly in the southeast, will struggle to meet their numbers if they cannot look at developments in the Greenbelt. But obviously, politically, it's very sensitive with members and local communities, and I think the government lets local authorities take the heat, rather than actually saying, you know, this is something that we need to do at the national level, guys, and not leave it to local authorities, members to sort of face the wrath of their communities. It's maybe chickening out, making those difficult decisions and passing the buck elsewhere.
I think, Sean, we did it with Chafford 100 when that was built. We did that. We didn't make it a community. And now all Chafford 100 has become is an in and out society. You know, it's lost that community hold, and it's so big. You know, I think we didn't learn, well, I hope we have learned a lesson from Chafford 100, you know, to make it more of a community feel. I know you've still got bits in Chafford that still work, but there's such a lot of outline bits of Chafford 100 that don't mix together, you know, don't get together. Alex?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report, Sean. When you introduced it, you mentioned towards the beginning that there was some concern in the sort of planning community that perhaps in these proposals there aren't. It doesn't seem as though there's as much opportunity for resident engagement as there has been in the past. And then later on, you mentioned that. What one of the things government really wants to do is ensure that residents' voices are heard when it comes to deciding about the sort of development that happens in their area, to ensure that it's in keeping with local characteristics and it's beautiful, etc., etc., etc. Do you see contradiction there in the proposals in here? If it is the case that these proposals, as they are now, would lead to less resident engagement, and then, you know, also saying, well, we really want residents to ensure that that they have their voice heard when it comes to what kind of development there is in their area. Do you see a contradiction here in that? And if so, have you relayed that back to the central government in any way?
Yeah, I mean, there is contradiction there, but I can see what government is getting at. And, you know, if you want to make better places, people really should be involved more in the local plan process, because it's what sets the policies and proposals, the framework, the ethos for the place that you want to create. I don't think planners have ever properly been able to get the mass involvement of local communities in actually doing that. And it's always happened when planning applications have been submitted and there's a red line around a map. People then get engaged because they can see it's happening on their doorstep. So I think if the first part is done properly, then the second part may not necessarily be as bad as certain practitioners are making out. I think holding on us to actually get the first part right, make it exciting, interesting, and actually have bite, so that what does come through the plan enjoys widespread support, because everybody can see their fingerprints on it.
Thank you.
Happy with that, Alex?
Yes.
Yeah. Just to give a bit of praise where praise is due, in Chadwell, we've got obviously a council development gone up. I've got to say, It looks absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, it's so different to other council estates that have been put up. I don't know if anybody's been past it at the moment, but it looks really good. And if we can do, people have got to have a place to live where they can take ownership of where they live. You know, if you don't take ownership of the place you're in, then you've lost. You know, then it becomes dilapidated, it falls into disrepair. So if you're giving people a bit of the open space and some trees and that's where we lost out with a persimmon site. There's nothing on there. You know, that's why we're trying to get that wood, because at least if we can put something back to the community. But it was just to give praise where praise is due, Lee. I don't know whether you can pass that on, but it looks really good, you know, and that will give some. I know people didn't particularly want that there, but looking at it at the moment, it's looking quite good. You know, it's a nice bit of real estate. It looks nice. So, has anybody got any more questions, Luke? Are you all right? Questioned out. Okay, Alex, you all right?
Nothing from me.
Lovely. You want to add anything, Lee?
No, thanks, Joy. Just to come back in on the last point you raised, really, I think it's just really important because I think as officers and as members, we've spent a lot of time trying to raise the bar in Thurrock, and actually the work that our own housing team have been doing in putting forward those schemes and raising that perception of place. And it's those schemes which help kickstart that local housing market or just raise up the profile of the areas is really important. So what the council can, you know, the council can't deliver the whole local plan, but it can do its part to set the bar to then the catalyst for change. So I think that's a really important point to probably finish on. So no, thank you.
Thank you. Sean, do you got anything?
Yeah, just a quick one. It was sort of like going back to Luke. I've now managed to think about the question he posed. I think sort of infrastructure as well. If we were to get something better from government, we would be looking at how local authorities and others can actually harness land value uplift to deliver the infrastructure that the local communities need. And I don't think government has actually come out with an approach that works yet, because going back to some of the things that concern Chair about some large-scale residential developments, they are housing developments with little else. And it's because landowners and developers have come in and pleaded we don't have the money to provide the open space or the shops or the community facilities that we promised in the beginning. And it's been able as a local authority to be able to make sure that those are delivered on time and when they're required. So I think that's giving local authorities more handle on how they might actually use the value created to get those facilities delivered to the planning process.
Thanks, Sean. Isn't there something coming through from government about open spaces and woodland areas and obviously with my motion we've put a lot of trees in Thurrock, so that's helped a little bit, but it's not done enough. But isn't there something coming through on there, Sean or Lee?
Not sure.
I thought I saw something the other day.
It's the commitment to return to make sure that to the wild 30%, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's something
that may help. That may help.
It's something that I've raised on LTC quite a lot about taking advantage of that with the whether we can get funding for that when the land is handed back from by Highways England. What we can do around those areas around the crossing.
Yeah, that was another question I had, Sean. Is a lot of this paper, is Highways England going to put something in the way for you for this, you know, until we actually know anything? We don't want it, but, you know, is all the things that are happening making it awkward for you with this?
I think one of the things that government's recognised is, or needs to recognise even more so now, is that local plans, if they're going to be produced in 30 months rather, 20%, 30 months, it will need infrastructure providers to actually sit at the table at the very beginning and help local authorities deliver the strategic infrastructure that's required. We can't have a situation as we've had in Thurrock, where we started work on the plan in 2014 and we've been stymied from progressing it as quickly as we would like because of constant changes in the route and alignment of the Lower Thames crossing. So I think, you know, whether it's utilities or the Highways England or others, government really does need to bang the table and make them more amenable to working with local authorities.
Sean, I sat on the first local plan, and we sat on that till 10:30 at night sometimes, you know, and we still no real further than we were back then. And having sat on planning, I think, I hate to say it, Lee, but planning has gone a bit awry. You know, we need perhaps more people. If we're going to have a planning system, we've got to have people on there who are committed and know what Thurrock's all about. You know, it has to be, you know, you have to have passion in the area too. You know, you've got to have that to put some of these things through that are coming, you know, to us. We have to have that, you know, everything in place, especially the infrastructure. Thank you, Sean, very much. Did you want to come back in, Sean, or still got your hand up? No, it's fine. Luke, Alex, you all right?
I'm all right.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Thank you, Lee. We're on item 7 now. Page 27, sustainable transport. Whose bit is that? Is that you, Lee?
Yeah, Chair, if I just quickly set the scene to this. So at recent meetings, we've spoken about obviously our approach to local plan, the need to ensure development is supported by that new and improved transport infrastructure, and indeed that's the conversation which we've just had. So to do that, it's really important for our local plan to be underpinned by a transport strategy which identifies current and future pressure points and opportunities for intervention to support that growth. And the report that is appended to the agenda was originally presented to PTR, and it sets out the steps that are needed to develop our transport strategy, really provided so this committee is kept up to date as well, see what's also running through PTR, because there is that overlap. So, and that, and Sean just touched on it, the need to get transport and sort of highway infrastructure providers around that table, looking at the plan, looking at what's coming forward, and looking at how we can develop solutions for that highway network to encourage truly sustainable transport to support those communities. That's what it's all about, and that's sort of underpinning the local plan, as it were. So it's really just for information, just to keep this committee in the loop, again, sort of running alongside PTR more than anything else. But happy to field any questions.
Yeah, people will say, you know, at the moment we haven't got a lot of movement. It's you know, when something happens in Thurrock, it all shuts down. I've only really got a couple of on the work stream, Lee. Thurrock vision for movement, what I've just mentioned, does that come into perhaps you can enlighten me on what, you know, bit of a broad what that means? Does that come in? What did I noticed Mark Coxall made a full council back, because I've been pushing for better things on the river. You know, we need to, if we're going to get traffic ever off the roads, we have to get them onto the, you know, taxis on the river, because that will solve a lot of our problems.
Absolutely. So the as part of the work that we're doing with the transport strategy is creating a transport infrastructure reference group, which will include people like the Thames Clipper, along with Highways England, along with the bus companies, along with C2C, and to look at how we are putting forward and giving opportunities to residents to move on different ways than just jumping in their cars. And we have a report going to PTR next, I think in beginning of December, to look at infrastructure for electric vehicle charging and how we can roll that out. And then through the design shreds, how we're talking to communities and landowners and developers about how we can increase opportunities for walking and cycling, and how we can build that into these new communities rather than the reliance upon the car and the congested road network. So it all comes hand in hand with that, and that's why if we have the design shreds on one side, we have the local plan wrapping around, but the transport strategy really runs hand in hand with this to as I say, to make it easy for people to get about the borough, and in the most environmentally friendly way possible.
Yeah, does that go alongside the freight as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So they're all merge into it. There is one. I'm trying to find the page on page 29 of the agenda. That's quite a neat diagram. It probably explains better what I'm trying to explain with hand gestures. But that diagram shows what
Saw
feeds
that.
into that.
I
Yeah.
could just about. I've got a good eyesight, but I could just about read that. It's like perhaps it could have been in colour. You know.
Yeah. Next time. Yeah.
Highlight it up. I think only one other question, Lee, just really about
Sorry,
car park
Chair.
strategy. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Councillor Spillman, he's just gone off the meeting, so we're in quorum right
We're not
now.
for it.
Yeah, so
Right.
give me a few minutes to just try and get him back on.
Perhaps just pop to the loo, eh?
I'm not sure about that, but he's not in the meeting anymore. So
That's all right.
as of right now, we're in quorum, so we can't really
No, that's
continue
fine.
until he
That's
comes
fine.
back.
Okay, dear, that's all right.
Let me just.
Wendy, could I be and ask who is CP?
Oh, it's the council chamber. It's our
Oh, that's
laptop to use to stream.
No, that's all
I'm going to pause the live stream for a few minutes because I think you'll have to adjourn the meeting for now, Chair, until Councillor Spillman can come back. But if he doesn't, then we'd have to
stop.
Because we're in quorum right now.
Okay, we're adjourning the meeting at 8:18.
Okay, now pause the stream now.
Okay.
Dear.
That's all right.
Okay, we're live now.
Thank you, Wendy. We can reconvening at 8:20. Okay, thank you. Lee, what I was going to ask, the last thing I've got to ask is the car parking strategy. What does that entail? And I would like to bring something back to this committee. Obviously, Wendy's listening, but about car parking on grass verges because it is getting worse. So that is something I think we need to be on, but that might come on the work programme, so I can bring that up in a minute. But I just need to know what the car parking strategy is.
Yeah. So the car parking strategy will sit alongside the freight strategy and all the other documents that are on the diagram there. So that all then feeds into the local plan. But in terms of your specific question, so the parking strategy will replace the existing parking strategy that we have, and it will look at parking standards for new developments, for flats, for houses. So what you would have seen previously at planning committee, and that's the idea. But the idea is to look at a document that can embrace new technologies, so EV charging, and also embrace walking and cycling. And so you can hopefully expect to see something that's a bit more innovative in terms of its approach.
Yeah, because I think I've said it before, Lee, haven't I? As Lakeside is on our doorstep, we're not going to get 2.2 people getting on a bus. That is not going to happen, you know, because if Lakeside is so near, the safest way to go for all your shopping, and you're not going to get on a bus with 2 children and when you've got a car sitting there. So I think the only way we've got to look at that is to open up the river more. That's got to come in with that, you know, because we've got a way of, I don't know, perhaps there's a way of using, excuse me, a way of using that. Sorry, does anybody else want to come in?
Luke, I'm okay. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, if you don't mind. One thing I would say is, is there any room for? I think I've turned my picture around somehow.
We can see you.
I'm a bit sideways. Is there any room for a partnership with an electric car provider in this scheme, in terms of corporate sponsorship in return for subsidy of vehicles, that sort of thing? You know, a big push to get people into electric vehicles in a partnership with a specific provider. Is that possible? I know. Is that possible in terms of legislation? from a legislation point of view, is it legal to have a partnership like that?
Thank you, Chair. So the report I just mentioned will be going to PTR ONS. We'll look at opportunities for the council to procure a provider for electric vehicle charging points within council estate, as it were, and that would allow for, because that's one of the main blockages, I think, for the take up on electric vehicles is the infrastructure that's in place to allow for charging for those. So what we're trying to do through that report is to look at getting the infrastructure put into place that will enable people to feel probably more comfortable hopping in their car if they know they can charge it all over the borough. They haven't got to wait and queue. But in terms of your question around the cars themselves and the manufacturers, that's not something which we're currently exploring.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be, I mean, part in terms of to deal with pollution, air pollution, obviously getting people out of their petrol cars into electric cars is the right way forward in terms of air quality. It would have a massive impact. But I do think that I would hope that it would be something that council could explore, because I think there could be a significant upside potentially in terms of, you know, getting access to people of Thurrock to electric cars at a cheaper rate if the council were to consider a partnership with one of the big providers. I think it's something that would be a novel and, you know, forward-thinking approach that could deliver great benefit to Thurrock.
For you, Chair, it's something that certainly I think we can look at as officers, and we can see whether there has been precedents or case studies done elsewhere, and certainly something which our highways team will be. If there is, then I'm pretty certain our team would have found out about that and would have already been aware of it. But certainly we could take that away as an action to see where that can go.
Mm. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Lee.
Chair, you're on mute.
Joy.
Sorry, so I turned it off because my phone went off. Yeah, probably the cost is stopping a lot of people from electric, but I don't think there's anywhere I can't think of anywhere except a garage where there's anywhere in Lakeside you can actually charge cars. In all the big car parks they've got, I don't think there's anything in there at all. So that may be something we could talk to Lakeside about, you know, to put something in there.
And that's the idea really, is to make sure that there is that infrastructure there. I think you're right. I can only think of IKEA. IKEA, I think, is the one that jumps to mind, that have a couple of bays. But certainly the idea is to put that infrastructure in place so that it is there for people to use, and it is about that sort of gentle shift over from the petrol and diesel onto electric.
I think it's if you know, we all think probably the hybrid's better because it charges while you're going along, doesn't it? When you use your brakes, the hybrid charges up, so that is better, because what I think a lot of people puts them off, it only goes a certain amount of miles, and then you've actually got to pull over for whether it's 40 minutes or something, you know, and most people don't want to do that. They want to get to where they're going. I know I probably wouldn't want to stop in the dark and have to charge, but yeah, I think it's something, whether we're not going to make a big burn into all going electrics. I don't think the grid will cope with it if everybody went electric, but I think it's something we've got to look at across the borough a little bit more for people to charge their vehicles, you know, because there are a lot of people that have got hybrids or all electric. So I think we've got to be in talks with someone, you know, about that. But perhaps you take that on board, Lee. That would be good. Have you got anything else, Lee, to add, or Sean, or that?
No, nothing for me, Joy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Alex, you all right?
No. All I'd say, Joy, is that I think the strategy was brought to the last PTR that I sit on, if I remember correctly, and I think it generated a bit of discussion there. The only thing I'd pick up on is what you mentioned, Joy, with regard to the car park strategy. I know that's certainly a big issue in my ward, and I presume in wards across the borough. So I didn't know if it was possible to at some point, get a particular report on our car parking strategy in general to this committee or PTR at some point at all.
We did have something done on Blackshots car park, didn't we, Lee? But nothing ever came of that. So I don't know where that went, or because we've had lorries parking in there. We've actually got rid of them now, but we've had about 8, 9 lorries parking in there overnight, using it as a toilet and God knows what. So we've actually shifted them now. So that's the sort of thing we're gonna, we're hoping to stop that. But that's the sort of thing we're gonna get, aren't we?
Yeah, and just quickly jump in there. I think the next step for the parking strategy is to host a series of workshops, which will be over the next 2 or 3 months with those sort of the big players, as it were, to start to influence and to shape this. And then we'll be in a place where we can then bring a further report back, typically via PTR, but certainly we can share documents and have them as briefing notes to sort of continue that conversation with this committee as well. I think there's a needness in that. But again, for you, Chair, we can look at that and see how we play that.
With PTR and this committee, we sort of blend in, don't we? In a way, we pick up the same sort of things. So it's like a joined up meeting, perhaps, Alex.
Why not? Why not?
Why not? Yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you, Lee, and thank you, Sean, very much. Thanks, members, for your input. Work programme. Has anybody got anything they want to put on there? I have, Wendy. I was just talking to Lee about that when we went off. Car parking on grass verges, so I'd want that brought to part of the working group. I don't know if in other wards, if they're probably having the same trouble with people working from home, isn't helping at the moment. But I think it's something we've got to look at, because we're just churning all our, grass verges, and we can't keep concreting over everything, because as we spoke earlier, we've got nowhere for the water to run. So I'd like to see that something come. I don't know who would present that, Lee.
Yeah, Chair. So if we're seeing car park and grass verges, that for me naturally feels like a parking strategy discussion as part of a wider conversation about the parking strategy, and that would sit within the transport development team. But yeah, I'll be happy for us to get that onto the agenda under the parking strategy. And then there would be, again, I think there'd be a neatness, but from us talking about the transport strategy this evening, then bringing back a report on the workshops to PTR, and then maybe going into the parking strategy here at this committee. Then there's that sort of neat flow between those, perhaps.
Yeah. Can we bring that on the January one?
What we'll need to do is just in terms of sequencing, because we've got the transport.
I want to leave it till next March. That's all, Lee.
No. So what we can do, what we can do certainly is have a conversation with the team and see the sequence from the baseline work that we're doing, the transport strategy work, the workshops, and then the parking strategy, because there's a sort of sequence of events that have to take place. But certainly let me take that one away. I'm happy for us to pencil it into for January, but then we can have a conversation. If we do need to shuffle it, we can. But yeah, we'll put it on there certainly.
Okay, brilliant. Is that right with you, Wendy?
Yes, Chair, I've added that.
Okay, thank you. Lee, or do you want to add anything about that? Do you have trouble in your ward or not? Wards.
Well, with parking, certainly there are areas, like I mentioned in Stamford East, that are struggling with people having to park quite a distance from houses, which I suppose in the summer isn't so bad, but obviously there are some residents that feel uncomfortable walking so far in the dark back home. But no, like I say, Chair, it's certainly something that I'd be interested to see come to committee.
Thank you, Alex. Luke?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that most of this stuff would sit with PTR, to be honest.
Yeah.
But in terms of local plan going forward,
Yeah.
I would like to see something about how these new developments are going to be planned and designed to avoid to provide adequate parking, and how the council. I'd like to see some how the council goes about planning that, the nuts and bolts of the workings that you do, the research that you do, the industry standard, assumptions that you make. Those sort of things would be helpful from my perspective, just to see how how the council goes about predicting and forecasting parking and transport volumes.
It's when they say 1.5 cars on a housing, I know you'd get half a car in, but you never know. I think it's got to, I know I keep mentioning the Persimmon site, but that's a site, that is just, nobody's got any room to park anywhere, and then, as Lee knows, the refuse trucks can't get down there anyway because the roads are too narrow. So it wasn't made for that, so I don't know how they address that. Now it's been built, it's, you can't undo what's been done. So we have to do it better in the future, I think. Okay. Anybody got anything to add, or are we all right?
All good, Joy.
Not from me.
Lovely. So we close the meeting, Wendy.
Yes, okay, Chair.
8:35. Okay.
Thanks, guys.
We're early.
I know.
You know why we're early, don't you? Councillor Rice wasn't here.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. And I'm sure Lee. I'm